Penguin Audio presents Outside Looking In, written and read by Garry Wills. Introduction: A Bookworm's Confession. A reviewer of one of my books in the 1960s said that I did not really belong to the intellectual circles of that time. Though I seemed to be educated, I showed no influence from Freud or Marx, Nietzsche or Sartre, the stars of the fashionable intelligentsia. That was true enough. I had, of course, read them, as was expected from a teacher in secular universities, but they had not entered early or deeply into my mental formation, which did set me apart from my contemporaries in the academy. I can understand why that might make me less interesting to readers, less part of the vital currents of my day. But I did not expect to be interesting. My attention was directed elsewhere and largely to the past. The earliest influence on me was that of Gilbert Chesterton, the Edwardian journalist, the subject of my first book, and not a usual figure in intellectual circles. Chesterton's heroes became my early heroes: Charles Dickens, Samuel Johnson, John Ruskin, William Cobbett, Robert Louis Stevenson. Again, not hot items in the period's literary world. These figures made me a kind of Anglophile, but not a snobbish one. Chesterton was far from elitist. He was a populist, a man who said that democracy is like blowing your nose. You may not do it very well, but you ought to do it yourself. He said that democracy means that when someone is drowning, your first instinct is not to say that a PhD is drowning, but that a man is drowning. And he said that the ordinary person should not be found guilty of a crime, but by a jury of fellow ordinary persons. Some thought that because I began by writing for William Buckley's National Review, I must be a conservative, but Buckley denied that. When he asked me at our first meeting if I was a conservative, I said, "Is a distributist a conservative?" He said, "Alas, no." Philip Burnham, a Commonweal editor and the brother of Buckley's National Review colleague James Burnham, had assured Bill that distributism was far from the free market capitalism that Buckley considered the basis of modern conservatism. Distributism was the politics of Chesterton, neither capitalist nor socialist, arguing for the preservation of private property but for its wider distribution. Liberals, on the other hand, would soon be telling me that I could not belong to them either, since they were secularists. My religiosity disqualified me. Born in 1934, I grew up in the 1940s, when being a Catholic still set one somewhat outside the national mainstream, ready to look inside without going there. I continued being an outsider when I was an academic looking in on journalism, or a journalist looking in on the academy, not joining professional organizations, not attending their meetings. For 18 years I taught at Johns Hopkins University, and for 25 years at Northwestern University, sometimes full-time, sometimes part-time. When teaching part-time, I did a fair amount of journalism, mainly for Esquire under its brilliant editor Harold Hayes, or for the New York Review of Books under its brilliant editor Robert Silvers. Throughout, I was a classicist, Yale Ph.D., observing modern politics, or a political observer looking back at history. My father thought I was guaranteeing my inability to make a living when I got my doctorate in classical Greek. That, he thought, would make me a perpetual sideliner. He had always feared that my bookworm ways guaranteed that life would pass me by. It bothered him that when caddying for him as a boy, I carried a book in the golf bag and pulled it out whenever his party was held up by those playing ahead. One summer when I was in grade school, he paid me money, I think $5, if I would go a whole...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?